Thank you for joining us today for the MiSTAR Learning Series titled Make Good Choices with MiSTAR. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
All right, so here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with thinking about what skills students need to be successful in high school, college, and their future careers. And then we're going to hear from another speaker, one of our guest speakers, about how one of our MiSTAR school districts has prepared their students for the future. And then we'll tell you what resources MiSTAR has compiled to offer support for you to help you make some good decisions about what to teach. Our guests today are Doug Opliger, who is a former high school science teacher and an engineer, and has taught engineering fundamentals at Michigan Tech for a long time. And he's also a founding member of the MiSTAR team, recently retired. And then we have Jen Lennon, who's also been with MiSTAR since early days. She's a learning coach and science teacher leader at Midland Public Schools. So before we get started, we're just going to warm up a little bit, and I'd like you to think about these questions. We all want to do what's best for kids. And so let's think about that for a little bit, and let's think about when we're trying to decide what do we spend our time with, what do we spend our time on when we're with kids. What do we think they need to be successful in high school science classes? What do we think they need to be successful in college and university science classes? And then what do your students need to be successful in their career or in the workforce? And so I'm going to invite you to join us in this Jamboard. And we have 3 boards. And the first one is, what do you think your students need to be successful in high school science? And then what do they need for university science classes? And then the last one, the career workforce piece. And so if you jump in there and just grab a sticky note on each of the boards and tell us what you're thinking. When you're deciding what to teach, you're trying to prepare your kids to be successful for their futures. And what are you thinking that they need for high school, for university, and then career or workforce? I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. All right, let's take a look at some of the things we have here. So to be successful in high school, we're thinking about things like using lab equipment, writing scientific arguments, soft skills, communication, active listening, communicating ideas, willingness to attempt class activities and share ideas, follow through, critical thinking, thinking like a scientist, perseverance and grit, how to express opinions, add on to others, ask questions. I see grit again, can-do attitude, be able to actively participate in discourse, discussion, communication, listening to directions. You know what I did not see there is knowing 15 different organelles in a cell. So that's good. So lots of kind of character, soft skills. What do they need to be successful in university, we think? Lab skills, working in teams, keep trying even when it's difficult, self-advocate, soft skills, communication, critical thinking, being able to work in teams, basic science literacy for sure, critical thinking, engineering design process, science terms, note-taking, self-advocating, how to work with others, how to read about science, organizational skills, perseverance, communication, asking questions, curiosity. All right, and then in the workforce, that's the pug. Blanking on his name. Noodles. Awesome. So in the workforce, managing tasks, taking initiative, organization, work with everybody, not just your friends, show up on time, be responsible, teamwork, organization, think for yourself, cite for information, see if it's reliable. Yeah, we'd like to see that in all of our adult population. Critical thinking skills, basic email etiquette, how to support idea with claim evidence reasoning, meet deadlines, self-directed problem solver, ability to find credible information, work as a team, positive attitude, reliable, responsible, organized, on time. All right, thank you so much for that. That's going to lead us right into our speakers. So I'm going to start off by turning this over to Doug, who's going to talk to you about his perspective as a high school teacher and also his many years as a college professor at Michigan Tech. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Chris. That Jamboard was really awesome because whenever we speak to people, it's so important to know your audience, right? And to know a little bit about what you're thinking, where you're coming from is such a huge help. And it's obvious to me when I look at this, we're kind of speaking to the choir here. I'm never quite so nervous as when I talk to teachers. Part of that stems from when I was a K through 12 teacher. I never really liked it when people came and said like, oh, this is what you should be doing. So it might sound like I'm doing that, but I obviously from your Jamboard answers, we know where we're going, but what we're going to try to do, what I'm going to try to do is talk a little bit about, what MiSTAR does specifically to get us in that direction. And so my first little, this is, we don't have to answer these, but what should they take away from science? As Chris pointed out, nobody put in their thing about organelles or autotroph definition. That autotroph, by the way, when I taught in K-12, we took the MEP test back then. There were questions on there like that, and like the essence of it was if you didn't know the definition of autotroph, you couldn't answer it, and it was like, this is crazy. We want to get to D, right? Something deeper, more meaningful that can carry across. So that's what we're going to do. So the next slide is kind of more the same, but we've moved from these silos, right? So in university level, where I spent some years teaching, there's even more silos and taller, and a lot more sometimes impenetrable separation. But in middle school, basically, we have life science, physical science, earth science, or biology, chemistry, physics, and earth science. And lots of times, or it used to be taught in isolation, nearly so. So we're moving toward integration because I'm going to say this over and over probably, everything's related, right? And so I realize it's easy and convenient, or relatively easy and convenient, to sort of put these things in packages. And when we look at the DCIs, they're still like that. So it's a wise to have those, but in order to teach them, we really would like to have some integration. How has this changed this? How are biology and earth science and physical science, together? Because they always are together, but when we look at a specific problem or system, they're often mixed up. So the words I have underlined there in the second paragraph, to make sense of the natural world and solve problems, that's where we're going, right? So how does MiSTAR or the NGS ideas help as we go here? Let's take a look. And so I'm going to look at this activity, these two activities, and I certainly don't suspect many of you do anything like activity A. But again, you don't have to answer this in the chat or anything, but just take a minute, read each one, and give a little thought to these two. So in some ways, they're not too dissimilar, these two activities, and not that one of them is bad and one is good. And certainly, I don't expect they'd be done just in isolation. But if we look at the two and think about what students get from each of these activities, or what they would produce, what we would expect from students, it's good that they can read a text passage, right, and get information out of a passage of text. If we go to the next slide,
oh, there we go.
There we go. Thanks.
Sorry.
So what students make right? And earlier I had that underline. What we want them to do is make sense. We want them to make sense of things. So if students read the text passage, they might get something like we see at activity A. They'll have a few things that they basically copied out of the text or derived from the text, and then a drawing that they probably copied out of the text or got from some place. And there's nothing wrong with what's there. It just, but what's happened with the student. If we look at B, what students might put here, just an example of what we might see, some of what we might see. So in that, usually I'm used to talking in a room and I'd call on someone here, but what are some differences between these two student products? So this is what a student would produce, right? And so this is what we have to look at and assess. If you wouldn't mind, just in the chat, just put some differences in there between A. So put A is this and B is that, or something, just so we can kind of ascertain what you're thinking here. We'll go about 10 more seconds here. Okay, I'm gonna stop here, and man, your observations and comments are really awesome. I wondered what folks would say here. So, but so many really good points there. I saw things, I can't go back and read them all, but like B seems to be more like in kid language, and A is more formal vocabulary, right? So B doesn't have kind of the formal vocabulary. And is that good or bad? It's different for sure. A is more factual, where B is more kind of exploratory. So there were some other really good things. Activity B, things that students actually understand. A is a list of things that they read and may or may not understand. But the two activities obviously are different. They lead to different outcomes, and we have something different here to assess. Now, we do want students to to get science, to know science, and be able to use proper vocabulary and kind of understand sort of the formal sense of science. But what we, in middle school especially, that intuitive curiosity that these kids have, what we don't want to do is smash that by marking a bunch of red ink when they don't do their vocabulary right. So here we have the opportunity with activity B to sort of look at this and then say, yeah, there's this area around the magnet that's where this field is force. If you move too far away, you don't feel it. So there's like this area where their forces are applied to other magnets. And maybe there's a real word for that. And then we can move toward this idea of a magnetic field. We can move toward the idea of opposites attract without knowing, like if you just had a couple magnets sitting here, where in the heck are you going to get north and south pole from? It'd be pretty difficult to get that. Okay, so let's move ahead here. So, making sense, it just makes sense. And to make sense, we need sort of a roadmap, right? We want to present students with, how do I make sense of things? And this is where the practices, or in NGSS language, the next generation science standards, like these science and engineering practices, the SEPs, are where it's at, and using those practices. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. Thanks, Chris. So when we go beyond middle school, which you guys already answered, the ones I love, I mean, all your responses were great, but the perseverance, the grit, right, to persevere challenging curriculum, to challenge them is difficult. If we think about those two outcomes we looked at from activity A and activity B, you know, which would students, I guess, like to do better? Well, I don't know. Some just rather read, write down, get the quote unquote right answers, get an A in their paper, and, you know, let's move on. But are they really learning to apply these practices? Are they getting any practice at perseverance and grit? So what MiSTAR does with its curriculum, and I've got in the second paragraph, you know, we now have supercomputers that we carry around in our pockets all the time, and you're all well aware of that, and so are your students. But so the facts type, the factual type stuff, the nuances of the DCIs aren't the most critical thing. Okay, so I think, I think we can agree that middle school is really an important time to do this, because I think students still have that innate curiosity that they aren't afraid to use in front of us. But we have to nurture that ability, right? And make them feel comfortable with coming out with something that may not be right, may not be the right vocabulary, may be a little different, but we want them to be okay with that, because we can move from there. We don't want them to leave middle school with this idea that, oh my God, I gotta have the words right, I gotta do all this reading and pass the test and get them all right. Okay, so building these skills is important to move on from middle school to high school. And then if we look at beyond that to college, I just grabbed, this is where I used to work, but this first year engineering course, if you would look at this.
Doug, it looks like we have a question from Kirsten.
A hand up from Kirsten.
Yes. Hi. So one of the questions that I had was, and maybe you guys have a course on this, which if it is so, and I need to just sign up for that, I understand. But when we're talking about that curiosity and that thought process, like most of my students, yes, I agree. They aren't comfortable getting there, but they can. However, we have a large, of course, special education, as well as EL program at our school. And like, I guess that's like where I find myself really racking my brain as to like supporting them as far as that. I mean, in our special ed team, they are up against us all the time because there isn't that like right answer. And like, are we just then asking, like, if you can just know these scientific terms, like, where is that line between the two, and where should we stand on that?
That's a lot of a question, and I know we have a lot of professional learning that gets closer to that. Jen Lennon, the next speaker, I hate to do this to you, Jen, but she'd be a much better answerer of that question, I think, than I would. So I'm not sure where to go right now, Kirsten. Is it okay if we just kind of take your question, which is an
We can
awesome
table it, that's
one,
fine, yes. We can
and just
table that
table it
question.
for now, and we'll if we don't come back to it, stick around or write us or something, and we'll answer it, because I'm going to talk a little bit more about that aspect in a second. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And Kirsten, I'd be happy to talk to you when we're done too, and give you some ideas.
Yeah. Okay, so before we move from this slide, if you read this course definition, it's like, oh my God, this is exactly what you guys had in the Jamboard in the beginning. Now, of course, I will tell you, in this course and in and this is engineering, right? But it's pretty similar, in the sciences if students pursue that direction in college, but really anywhere in college, that idea of perseverance and grit and asking questions and communicating information, all that stuff follows through. So these practices are good anywhere, but in this engineering stuff, you can see what's really important. Now, of course, in here, yes, students are going to have to know how to write computer programming and get the command line exactly right, or the computer program won't run. But that's something that's kind of left to the student, as again, use your supercomputer or whatever, and you can figure those things out. But these practices, these overarching skills are the key to doing well. Okay, now moving on to the workforce, whether that's after college or with no college, just after school. This is some documented things. I took this slide from one of our colleagues, Barb McIntyre, who put this out there, and you'll have access to these slides so you can look at them. So again, really nothing different than what you guys had on the Jamboard. Problem solving is part and parcel of everyday life at any company, and it's just everyday life, period, right? Okay, so what are these practices that need practicing? Well, of course, there are these SEPs, right? The science and engineering practices that are part of the next generation science standards. But I want just to present them to you maybe in a way that maybe you haven't seen before. And the only difference is in this list, the very first one, the asking questions and defining problems, that's really the starting point, right? When you're observing the world, whatever it is, and you see magnets that they can apply a force without touching. I mean, that is kind of mind-blowing, actually. You can apply a force to another thing without any touching at all. Like, what's going on there? So that asking questions, or if we're in engineering, the defining the problem. We want to solve this problem. How do we define that problem? That's kind of the beginning point, but also I have iterative or cyclical, because once you start looking into it, you just have more and more and more questions that come out of it. And so you need to sort of put a boundary around the system you're looking at and about what you're trying to do. And then the other stuff, can get to later, other people can do it or something, but it's a iterative or cyclical thing. Then the ones that I have single asterisk by, you can look at these in lots of different ways, but those three are, I think of them as overarching. They're ways kind of that students are going to show you their thinking and show you. So developing and using models, engaging in argument from evidence, constructing explanations, or showing the design for solutions. They're going to use kind of the other practices often, very often, if not always, to get to those three, where they're going to convey their work or their thinking to others. So when we're looking at a middle school or a middle school curriculum, we got we got these practices, right? The 8 practices, the 7 cross-cutting concepts, and the 59 performance expectations that are part of middle school. We can't do it all. We just can't, right? So what do we focus on? Well, my suggestion would be always going to be asking questions, but kind of these 3 practices as a core, right? And then the other practices are going to support these 3. So that's one way to look at it. And that's the way that our documents that we offer as suggestions are part of this. Okay, so let's wrap this up. As Kirsten's question alluded to, if it was easy, anybody could do this. This is very difficult stuff. And so we can't just think of these like activities by themselves. We got to think, well, how is the unit going to culminate? And what MiSTAR does is these explorations that we do are always part of a deeper lesson, and that's part of a very deep unit where we're solving a unit challenge. So everything we learn, lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, is applied to this unit challenge. So it gives another context for the students to practice the practices. And I think as we've learned, the struggle is real. It really is. And the struggle is where the students learn. This perseverance and grit and stuff, that's what we want students. The students who can just like really good memorizers and read books and get, A's on the tests, that's great. But what we really need is for them to face challenges and work through the challenges and have like the answer to the question, what do I do when I don't know what to do? And that's where the practices really help. And then this is just a list of kind of the practices in other words. Okay, I'm going to pass this off to Jen. And just a note, I don't know, this wasn't planned, but Jen and I actually went to the same high school. And so we, and this isn't important at all, except for it's interesting. So
Yeah.
Jen, I'll let you take it from here.
I've enjoyed working with Doug for 6 or 7 years now, Doug, through MiSTAR. And so we've been involved. I've been involved since really the beginning. And our district uses MiSTAR and has for about 6 years. And so what I want to talk to you about is I know that probably there are people in this group today who haven't been practicing it as long in your districts. And I don't know if my experience is like your experience, but we get asked by administration, are you getting through it all? Can you get through all the content? And where are the holes? And it's always this discussion. Sometimes it's high school to middle school as well. And so it's a constant battle of, covering information. And so it's a hard one to fight against because it's so ingrained in teachers we got to get all of this stuff done. So I want to just share with you what my experiences have been in Midland as we've gone through this process, and maybe give you, if you look at these slides, it might give you some information or slides that you can use if your district is having similar questions like, well, you're not getting through it. So what's the problem here? And, what are you going to do about it? So go to the next slide, Chris. And Doug really kind of talked about these things a little bit already, but I just thought, you know what, I'm going to go back to the NGSS, the real document, and just look at, their fact sheet. This is from their fact sheet of why they developed the NGS standards. And you can see by looking at this that, obviously the focus is because we've got a growing need for STEM jobs, people in STEM fields. And I think everybody knows that field is growing faster than any other field. And then also that you can see that it's the application of the content that's most important, not just learning the facts. And we've already kind of brought that out. And I see that a lot of you have realized that that's the important thing. Next slide. They also have in this document that this is what it should look like in the classroom. And these is an exact quote: hands-on, collaborative, rooted in inquiry and discovery, designing solutions, student-centered, communication skills, problem-solving skills. And in addition to all of that, we have to also teach them the content. And so we've got twice as many things going on here. It's so much more difficult than just teaching the facts. And if you see the little bubble off to the side, what do those things remind you of? Next slide, the SEPs. Yeah, so that's what we decided in Midland is, all right, NGSS, and now since we've adopted NGSS as in our Michigan Science Standards, we have to focus on the SEPs more. Instead of it being maybe 75, 25, 75 content, 25, working with the content, we're thinking of it more as 50-50, that we really give that extra time. And I'm not saying 50-50 is exactly what it should be. I don't want to say that that's the exact formula, but we need to spend more time on the science and engineering practices. So next slide. This takes time. And as well as I do, I'm speaking to the choir that if they're going to get deep understanding, They need to be able to process the information. So you might start with some content, but that you need to get them to understanding. And to reach understanding is where we decided that's where the SEPs come in, is getting students from knowing certain facts to being able to apply them and have true understanding. So there's this constant struggle of uncovering versus covering. Covering is the traditional way. We cover all of the units. We make sure we get to everything. But what we really need to do is prioritize uncovering, figuring out where there's confusion with students. What are their misconceptions about science? And what questions do they have about science, or what don't they understand? We've got to make sure we give time for that so that kids really enjoy and say, I want to go into a science career. I want to go into a STEM career because this is what we do. And so it's getting back to that true nature of, what is science all about? And so if you go to the next slide, please, Chris. A while ago, I don't know if you know anything about Robert Marzano, but back in 1998, he did a study where he looked at all of the standards across the nation. And he thought, how long really realistically would it take for a district to cover everything that they're supposed to cover? And back in 1998, he said it would take an extra 10 years of school to teach all of the standards. And so I know that's old research. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to just look myself. Let's just look at what we have right now with this, with the science in it, or with the performance expectations, everything that we've got in our standards that are based on the NGSS in our Michigan Science Standards. And let's just see how many days we think it would take to cover everything. So there are 59 performance expectations. And if you know what a performance expectation is, it includes one SEP at least, one or more DCIs, and one or more cross-cutting concepts, okay? And so think of that, there are 59 of those. So if you split that out into the 3 grades, let's say 20 per grade level need to be taught, okay? Is this doable in a year? Short answer, no, but I want to give you some evidence as to why that is not going to happen. So let's take a look at this topic arrangement here. Here's an example of a topic arrangement that you'll see in the NGSS. And if you look at the top, it's got 2 performance expectations, and they're in the white box at the top. And then underneath that is a blue box, an orange box, and a green box. And I'm sure most of you have seen these and looked at these before. So these, if you look at all those bullets in the blue and the orange and the green boxes, that's how many things basically that you need to cover if you were going to do this topic arrangement together with those 2 performance expectations. So if I count the bullets, there are, I think, 10, right? 10 different ideas. Some of them are science and engineering practices. So if you look at the blue, constructing explanations and designing solutions, and then engaging in argument from evidence, 2 of them that students need to work with. Then you've got 4 content pieces, and then you've got the cross-cutting concepts in addition to that. So I want you to take a pencil, or maybe you can do this mentally. Let's do some actual computational thinking, which is an SEP. Let's do an SEP, and let's see. All right, if this is an example of one arrangement with two performance expectations, and remember, we have to do 20 in a year, okay? So I want you to think, how many days do you think it would take to teach this topic arrangement with these 2 PEs? If you're thinking, okay, I've got 10 bullets, how many days do you think that might take? And I just want you to, first of all, put your answer in, but I'm going to do waterfall, so don't put your answer out there until I say go, and then you'll put your answer. But let's just think about it. How many days do you think it would take to teach this arrangement? Give you a couple minutes. You've got evaluating competing design solutions. You've got constructing explanations. You've got several pieces of content there. So how many days? So put in the chat how many days you think. Go ahead now. Yep. I was thinking on the low end, maybe 20 days. I was thinking maybe, oh, not yet.
Sorry.
That's okay. I was thinking maybe 2 days on average, some of those are going to take more than 2 days, but I was thinking, 2 days each, that's 20. Let's make it easy math, right? Now you got to multiply that, since that's 2 PEs, you have to multiply that by 10, because there are let's say there were, several other topic arrangements that had 2 PEs. Let's say they all had 2 PEs, they don't. But if you have to cover 20 in a year, then 2 times 10 is 20. So we've got to take that, let's say 20 on the low end, 20 days to teach these 2 PEs and multiply that by 10. And if you look at the next screen, that would be 200 days needed. And to me, that's on the low end. And for some of you, it would be more like 300 days. It looks like to me, it's a lot of days that you need. And we have 180 days in a year, but we really don't have 180 days in a year. We have maybe at best 150 days, I'm guessing, by the time you figure in snow days and you figure in NWEA testing and all of these other things that have to go on in your classroom. So is it doable? No, it's not. So as a district, we had to make some decisions then about, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to just try to fly through all of the units? What's the best approach? I had some people that said, okay, well, here's a way we could do it. We could just, if we covered the SEP in one unit, we could maybe just take that out in the next unit. Let's say it's analyzing and interpreting data. Okay, we did that in last unit, so we could maybe skip some of that analyzing and interpreting data in this unit, because we just are running out of time. But you can't do that, and let me show you why. If you look at the next slide, here are 3 performance expectations. They all have analyzing and interpreting data in them. But if you take a look at the bullets are different. They're focusing on different things. In the first one, analyzing and interpret data to determine similarities and differences in findings. In the second one, construct and interpret graphical displays of data to identify linear and non-linear relationships. And in the third one, analyze and interpret data to provide evidence for phenomena. And while these are all amazing, great things, personally, I don't want to skip out on those. To me, that shows me that there's a lot to learn about each one of the SEPs. And you can't just call it, okay, we covered that in this unit. We already did analyzing and interpreting data in this last unit, so let's skip it for this unit. So we decided, no, that's not the way that we're going to do this. And we also realized that it takes kids multiple experiences to really get good at an SEP. And I don't even think they're going to get good at it by the time they get out of 8th grade. But they need all of those experiences with the SEPs. So this is what we did. If you take a look at the next slide, this is kind of what we decided as a district, that we were going to hold true to the MiSTAR and NGSS philosophies. So we were going to make sure that we had a balance of content coverage with science skill instruction. And if we don't get to every unit, that's okay. That wasn't going to be the important thing to us. For the sake of our kids and for help and, just maintaining that philosophy of helping them to enjoy science and know what it really is like to be a scientist, we wanted to keep it to fidelity. We decided that we were going to use the SEPs as our crucial step to move kids from just knowledge level, factual understanding or factual knowledge to understanding, in-depth understanding. So we wanted to go for depth versus breadth. So that's why we decided the SEPs were important. Sometimes we meet with the high school teachers to confirm maybe which content instruction we need to focus on. That might decide, okay, maybe this year we didn't do that unit, but the high school teachers are hoping that we can do that unit. We might make a switch. But really, honestly, the high school teachers are just happy with us bringing them students who are good at the SEPs. So we really haven't had any issues with content coverage with them, but we still do like to meet with them and gather information about what they're seeing from the kids coming their way. And the last thing is, though we value building level autonomy, teachers making decisions about what they're going to teach, what units they're going to keep or cut or maybe combine. We have some teachers who kind of have combined a couple of units. We have to stay true to the MiSTAR lesson structure and the unit structures. So we don't ever, not include a unit challenge. Now the unit challenge might change a little bit if we're combining units, we might change the unit challenge a little bit, but we always stay faithful to that basic model of MiSTAR, and we stay faithful to the units, the lesson plan structure as well, that you know very well since you've been doing the units. So the one thing I do want to say as a caveat though is, remember, we've been at this for 6 years. So we can do those things like combining units and all of that kind of stuff. I would not suggest that for somebody, a district that's newer at this. I would say just pick your 3 to 4 units that you know you can get to and do them with fidelity the way MiSTAR has set it up till you get a real good handle on the lesson structure and the unit structure. Then once you are able and you understand that, you can start to make those decisions and maybe combine things a little bit, maybe combine content. But again, keeping that idea that the SCPs are the most important thing to balance with the content that you're teaching. So that's kind of our story in Midland. And I know that some of you have stories as well to tell. And so we thought what we would do is put you in breakout rooms and let you share what's happening in your district. Okay, so you're going to go back into your same breakout room. And make sure you give each person, a chance to share, ask questions for clarity, and then nominate one group member to share just a highlight from your discussion so that we can hear maybe some different things that are happening in different districts. I would like to learn from some of you as well. So, and then if you have questions, we can also address questions after the breakout room as well. Okay, so what we like to do now is just have your spokesperson just give us a summary of some of the things that you talked about. And so I'm gonna just call on a group or a breakout session number, and then the person from that session can share the highlight, okay? So let's not start at 1 and let's not start at 5, I think, because what group was I in? Was I in group 1?
You were in group 1, Jen.
Okay, so I'm not going to start with 2 and I'm not going to start with 6. I'm going to pick group 4. So group number 4, will your spokesman please share, spokesperson, I mean?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we were in group 4. So the highlight, one of the things that we all agreed on was, luckily in our districts, there's not much pushback on getting tons of content in. They put a lot of trust in us, which we really did appreciate. So a lot of us, we just talked a lot about through some of the units and just parts of it that we found that we ended up taking out, and parts that we found that we really liked and wanted to keep in there. So it was really good to talk through different specific units. Currently I'm working through the RAD unit, and it's a fun one, but it did take us a really long time last year. And so just hearing another teacher's experience with it was really helpful.
Good. Awesome. That's great. And so great to hear that your administration has a lot of trust in what you're doing.
Yeah. And one more thing I should note was, it seemed like all of us agree that about 4 units is safe, where we can get through 4. This is my 2nd year teaching and MiSTAR, and we might get 4.5, lucky if we get 5. And one of the other teachers mentioned that 5, maybe 5 this year too. So that's kind of where we're at in grade levels.
Yeah, I think that's pretty typical. So yeah, the big key is don't feel guilty about it, right? I mean, you know that what you're doing is best for kids and you don't want to rush through, and they're going to get a better quality experience. If you do the units to fidelity, not that you can't make changes here and there, I don't want to say that, but yeah, that's about what we're experiencing here too, 4 to 5 at best. Okay,
right.
Let's go with group 6 now.
Okay, that's me. We also just talked about how 4 seems to be the magic number for most people, unless one of them is a really short unit, like some of the like 8.5 AB can be really short, or one of the lesson 7 has a 1 split. And then a few people talked about how when they first started with MiSTAR, they taught the same unit over multiple grades. That's a good way to get started, to have everybody working together, like the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers, because the kids had never had MiSTAR before, they all taught the same 6th grade unit. And then the next year, the 7th and 8th grade teachers didn't teach that unit again because the kids had already had it. But that's also a way when people are new to kind of ease into it.
Great idea. All right. Anything else, Jen?
No, we also kind of got into started talking about just specifics to different units and things we liked and didn't like, and which units we were thinking about teaching and skipping, but that's it.
Yep. Good. Thank you. How about room number 3, group 3?
Number 3, that's ours. So we talked a lot about how getting started with MiSTAR takes a little while, and even getting the students started takes a little while. So, and my district's been using it for a little while, 5 or 6 years now, but like our 6th grade still only does 3 units, but our 8th grade is up to 5, because not only are the teachers better at it because they were at it a little longer, but the students are better at it. And so that's been kind of interesting. We also thought it was important for people to have permission to not do them all. So don't go in with the expectation that they're all going to happen. But also there are some great things that MiSTAR provides that are NGSS aligned, like modeling or even CER writing, that kind of stuff that can be done K-12. And so pulling those good parts out and making them part of the whole really allows students to grow in those middle years from where they were to where they're going to be in the high school. And MiSTAR has a lot of great ideas for that. I think the teachers find it a little challenging to make them always happen, but the ideas are there.
Definitely more ideas than you could ever use, right? Which is nice to have that many resources. It's amazing. Okay, thank you, Joan. And so let's go with group 5 now.
That's me. We all found out that we were all kind of on track to getting 4 units in per year, which was satisfying to hear that I'm not alone. My district personally, though, is not there at all. We're at like 2.5 right now. So this is our 3rd year, but 2 of those years were in the pandemic. So we're working on it. But it was nice to be able to hear from other districts. We all had kind of different ways that we came to determine which units that we would teach each year or per grade level, based on district needs, which was interesting. And then we did talk a little bit about some.
Does that mean you're coming home?
Unit-specific changes that people have made, which was nice to hear.
Good. I'm glad you had the chance to share and see what other districts decided to choose, which ones they chose and which ones they couldn't get to. All right, last one is group 2.
So that's our group. I mean, we were just pretty much came up with the same type of thing. Most of us knew that we weren't going to be able to get through all the units. We talked about, I mean, for most of us, 3 to 4 was kind of where we were at. One person talked about how their district was like expecting them to get through them all, and I guess they're just kind of to tell them like, yeah, it's almost impossible to do that. It was just how it's set up, but overall, and we were just kind of all happy with like the discourse of it, and like there's a lot of skills that the kids are learning regardless of the unit that they're teaching, that they're using, that can be applied to all that stuff. So I mean, there's a lot of positives that just to kind of keep working on that stuff. And like even with my district, we're year 4 or 3 or 4, so with using MiSTAR with the pilot stuff. And I mean, the more I do the units, the faster I get, but I guess we're still not going to do any more than 4, maybe 5 in a year, even if we get really, really good at these units.
Definitely. All right, thanks everyone for sharing, and I will turn it back to Lindsay.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing those thoughts. It's great to hear that there was some consensus on some things, and maybe you could pick up a few ideas from your colleagues of what you might do in the future. But I'm here today to talk about MiSTAR resources that can help you with some of these decisions that you have to make. And we can stay after for questions if people had questions that came up during the breakout rooms or during this presentation. So please stick around. So my name is Lindsay Watch. I'm sure most of you have seen an email or two from me about the learning series, but I also work on the curriculum development team. So I'm here today to share some of the resources we've developed based on feedback from teachers like you, to help make these curriculum decisions. And so all of the resources that I talk about in these couple slides are linked in the agenda, and then they're linked in the speaker notes of each of those slides. So if you're going back and going, oh gosh, where was that document? I have it in a couple places, so hopefully you can easily find them. So we have some documents, if you could do the next slide, please, Chris, that are linked on our dashboard that I kind of wanted to point you to. So if you hover over that black bar when you're on your dashboard and hover over that resources word, you'll get this drop-down list. And so the resources I talk about today are in that organizational resources document. It's a table that just has a list of some helpful links for you. And I think the most important one is the one on the next slide here, which is our scope and sequence documents. And so we have one for each grade, and the curriculum development team worked together to develop these recommendations, since we worked on these units and we know kind of the implications of these different the time commitments and constraints that you're working with. And so to build these scope and sequence documents, we really considered content knowledge, what's covered throughout the middle school grade band, and then building towards high school, implications for those other middle school grades. What effect does it have choosing one 6th grade sequence over another? How is that going to impact 7th and 8th grade? So we have some narrative in there to help explain that. And we also considered, covering a good range of practices to help students build that range, right, of all those skills. I did include a link to the list of SEPs, the practices there on that slide as well. The links are from the NSTA. Those are really helpful resources for us when we're writing curriculum. So if you need a cheat sheet of the list of SEPs, it's also linked there. These documents also include a short summary of the unit challenge, because I think a lot of teachers know the unit by the unit challenge more so than maybe the unit number. So we have that information there, as well as the practices and the core content that each of those units assesses for the unit. We also listed some strengths of the unit that you can consider as you're looking at the different scopes. And then some things you might want to consider before choosing or teaching a unit. Some units maybe have a lot of supplies that you need to collect ahead of time. Some are maybe more model intensive, so making sure your students are up on system models before tackling that unit. So we tried to list some of those considerations for you as well. So there, like I said, there's one for each of the grades, and they are linked in the agenda document for you to look through. We also have the unit progression model that you might find useful. So this is our whole curriculum, and it's a table on our website, and it lists the PE bundles for every unit. So which standards are assessed in the unit. It also includes information about the semester-long cross-cutting concept and the unit's 21st century theme, which is what those colors are indicating. And Chris and I are happy to stay on and take questions about these resources, how to use them, how we can help you make those decisions. If you'd like to stick around after the session or reach out to us. I did have a couple more slides just to plug a few things that I hope might be helpful for you. We recently sent out an email with a link to the pandemic resources document. Just want to make sure everyone saw that. It's also linked at the top of the dashboard when you log in. It's a whole list of resources that maybe you'll find helpful right now. Hopefully you don't need them, but we have these things here like remote resources for certain MiSTAR units, We have some sub-plan resources. We've got remote learning lessons that really actually focus on those practices that could help, it's kind of like an off-the-shelf lesson where you can just pull it whenever it's needed. We also have some remote adaptations to our off-the-shelf lessons, as well as some career connection lessons. They're really nice extensions for some of our units that could, work in a pinch. We know things are tough in the classroom right now, so hopefully you can find some of these resources useful. But of course, if there's anything else we can do to help, please reach out and let us know. And finally, just the last slide is just some information about upcoming MiSTAR sessions that we'd like to share. One that I would like to highlight is coming up just in a couple weeks on February 8th. It's our next learning series, Thinking Outside the Box. What can Michigan Tech, what can MTU do for you? It's going to be a really fun session. It's like a virtual escape room experience that Michigan Tech offers for students, but you'll get to experience it as your students would. And they're also going to share some other middle school opportunities for you and or for your students. They have actually quite a few things that they have available. So I really encourage you to sign up and come to that one. I'm really excited for it. There's more information on the learning series and assessment series sessions on our Events for Educators webpage, which is linked there at the bottom. So hopefully we'll see you again soon. And we really wanted to thank you for coming today. We know this has been a bear of a year so far, and we appreciate you carving out the time to be here with us.